By the end of the first decade of life, all of us will come to hold something that we can never put down. The knowledge that one day we will die. This awareness of death is a central part of the human condition. The early American psychologist William James famously referred to this awareness of death as the worm at the core of the human experience. We are the only species that we know of that has the capacity to contemplate our own mortality. And this awareness and fear of death permeates every aspect of human culture. This is a statue that many of you may recognise here at the University of Sydney. It depicts King Gilgamesh. The Epic of Gilgamesh is the oldest surviving great work of literature that we have. This 4,000-year-old Babylonian poem tells the story of King Gilgamesh, who witnesses the death of a close friend. Gilgamesh is devastated by this death and by his sudden realization that he too will die one day. This leads him to go on a lengthy quest to try and find the secret to immortality, before he is eventually forced to accept the fact that he will die. So at the heart of the oldest surviving great work of literature we have is the fear of death and the desperate desire for eternal life. This theme was not unique to the literature of the Babylonians. We see it repeated time and time again across cultures. William Shakespeare gives us another example of this. More than half of Shakespeare's plays deal explicitly with the fear of death, including some of his most famous scenes, such as Hamlet's to be or not to be soliloquy and the graveyard scene, in which Hamlet finds the skull of the court jester Yorick. So literature is one way that humans have grappled with this fear. Religion is another way. All religions offer some kind of solution to the problem of death, and images of death feature across the religions. In 14th century Europe, it was common for Catholic monks to keep a real human skull on their desk as a reminder of mortality. And skulls have been used in other religious traditions, such as Tibetan Buddhism. This is a kapala, a real human skull decorated and used as a ritual object. Ritual gives us a fascinating glimpse into the ways that humans have tried to deal with this fear. One of the oldest well-documented rituals that we have, the ancient Egyptian mummification rituals, are a clear example of this. To mummify a body in ancient Egypt was a hugely ambitious and time-consuming process. It took 70 days on average to mummify a body. And every step in that process had one goal and one goal only. And that was to keep a corpse looking as lifelike as possible for as long as possible, in the hope of ensuring immortality. Art is another way that humans have expressed this fear. There are two entire genres of art which solely focus on death. One is the danse macabre, which depicts skeletons leading people of all social classes to their grave, to remind the viewer that all of us share the same destination. And the other is the vanitas genre, which uses more symbolic imagery to remind the viewer of their own death. But all of the great artists have dealt with death in some form. From Frida Kahlo to Andy Warhol, Salvador Dali, Gustav Klimt, Escher, Edvard Munch. Munch was fixated on this image. Titled The Sick Child, it depicts his sister on her deathbed. Munch did 6 paintings of this exact scene, more than 40 drawings, a clear reflection of his difficulty coming to terms with the death of his sister. And Pablo Picasso, in one of Picasso's final self-portraits titled Self-Portrait Facing Death, we see the clear terror that Picasso felt as the end of his life approached. So for as long as humans have been recording history and creating culture, the fear of death is one of the universal themes. It wasn't until the 1970s that we had the first major attempt to understand the psychological impact of the fear of death. And this came in the form of Ernest Becker's Pulitzer Prize-winning book, The Denial of Death. Becker argued that humans have an innate motivation to live, but we also know that our death is inevitable, and this combination can produce a crippling fear. A decade later, this work was extended into a social psychological theory known as terror management theory. Terror management theory argues that humans have two main buffers in the face of death. The first are cultural worldviews. These are shared values, norms, and beliefs that give us a sense of symbolic immortality. I as an individual will die, but my culture will outlast me. And so by subscribing to cultural worldviews, such as valuing academic achievements, financial success, or the accumulation of wealth, cultural worldviews such as group identity, supporting a particular political ideology or protest movement, or cultural worldviews of a religious nature, such as the belief in the afterlife, by subscribing to these, it gives me a sense that I am part of something greater than myself. The second buffer they propose is self-esteem. By living up to the expectations of our cultural worldview, we gain a sense that we are a meaningful, significant person. Achievements such as succeeding at university, starting a career, raising a family, or contributing to a cause reinforce the belief that I am a meaningful, significant person and that I will be remembered fondly after I die. Over the last 4 decades, there have been more than 500 studies done in this field, all showing the same thing. When humans are reminded of death, our behaviour changes dramatically. We know that reminders of death make people more aggressive towards people who hold different cultural worldviews. We know that reminders of death make people want to spend more money. And we know that reminders of death make people assign harsher punishments to those who break social norms. And shockingly, this has even been found amongst real American judges. But what about clinically relevant behaviour? As a clinical psychologist, I believe it is vital for us to understand the hidden factors that might be driving mental health problems, so that we can develop treatments which are as effective as possible. And over the last decade, in research that began here at the University of Sydney, myself and my collaborators have developed a radically new way of understanding mental health problems. Our research suggests that many of the common problems filling our clinics, phobias, health anxiety, PTSD, OCD, might not in fact be different problems at all. They might be different manifestations of the same underlying fear, the fear of death. If we look at some of the common mental health conditions, we can start to see how the fear of death might be operating underneath the surface. In panic disorder, where people are fearful that that tight chest or racing heart could be a sign of a heart attack. In health anxiety, where people are repeatedly going to their doctor, seeking medical tests, convinced that something is seriously wrong with them. In agoraphobia, where people are too fearful to leave their house in case something bad happens to them. In all of the common phobias, fears of heights, fears of flying, fears of spiders, all of which can directly kill you. And in obsessive compulsive disorder, or OCD, in the contamination type, where people will compulsively wash out of fear of contracting some kind of serious illness, or in the checking type, where people will compulsively check stovetops, locks on doors, electrical outlets, out of fear of household fire, invasion, electrocution. Our research has shown that the fear of death is not just linked to these different mental health conditions, but actually plays a key driving force in these conditions. Our experiments have shown that when you give people with OCD subtle reminders of death, they spend twice as long washing their hands. When you give people with health anxiety subtle brief reminders of death, they are 4 times more likely to want to go to their doctor, looking for reassurance that they are healthy and well. And this matters clinically, because our current standard treatments for these problems might only be scratching the surface. They might be failing to address the underlying core fear. And if the fear of death does underlie these different problems, then targeting that fear directly opens up a radically new way for us to treat mental health problems. But what about the general community, and not just people actively seeking mental health treatment? I analysed data from more than 24,000 people from across the globe, and the results were striking. The fear of death was linked to every single mental health outcome we found: depression, anxiety, stress, and on the whole, poorer well-being. The results are now clear. The fear of death plays a pivotal role in mental health and psychological distress, not just for people seeking treatment, but for the general community around the globe. So far, I've been focusing on the fear of death as an individual problem, but anxiety and attitudes towards death don't exist in a vacuum. They are heavily shaped by our upbringing, our culture, and the world around us. And in many ways, modern society actively encourages us to avoid death. For most of human history, death happened in our homes, and the dead were buried near us. Now, death typically happens behind closed doors, in hospitals or in aged care facilities. And when people die, we bury them in cemeteries far away from where most of us live our daily lives. And culturally, we place a strong emphasis on prolonging life at all costs, often without making space to think about what it really means to have a good death. We even avoid death in our language. When someone dies, we say that they passed away, or we say, "I'm sorry for your loss." We avoid explicitly naming death, almost as though doing so might somehow bring death about. And from a psychological perspective, this really matters, because avoidance doesn't reduce anxiety, it actually maintains it. And so when we keep death out of sight, out of mind, and out of the conversation, it actually makes it harder to face, more unfamiliar, more terrifying. So what can we do about this? We can't change the fact that we will die, but we can change our response to death. My research has shown that the key to reducing our fear of death is not through avoidance, it's through exposure. The same principle we've been using to treat anxiety for decades. So the key is not to distract ourselves from it or suppress it. The key is to turn towards it. To talk about death. To plan for our own death and for the death of our loved ones. To deliberately seek out and sit with reminders of death. And often when we begin to face the reality of death, we experience a radical transformation in how we live. I see this in my clinic all the time. When people start to face death, the way they live starts to change. They don't just become less fearful of it. Accepting death allows us to focus on what really matters, to be less trapped by status, perfectionism, resentment, and fear, to be more present with the people that we love, more courageous, and more authentic. Because if we really face the reality that life is finite, it forces us to ask one vital question. If life will end, what truly matters? Death is the one reality that all humans share. We can't control that. But our response to death, whether we spend our lives running away from the inevitable, or whether we allow mortality to deepen and enrich how we live, that choice is firmly in our hands. Thank you.